When people think of World War II armor, German tanks are often considered the absolute best of their era. They were feared, heavily armored, and technologically advanced. But which of these legendary machines were actually the most effective on the battlefield? Today we are breaking down the ultimate German war machines. From the relentless StuG and the deadly Panther, to the iconic Tiger I and Tiger II, all the way to the massive Jagdpanther and Jagdtiger. Get ready, because we are about to find out which of these steel beasts truly ruled the front lines. Now we get to one of the real paradoxes of the German Panzerwaffe. Ask the average viewer about the Reich's best armored vehicles, and they'll usually name the Tiger or the Panther. But ask a German infantryman in 1943 what he'd want parked next to his trench, and he likely wouldn't hesitate. The StuG, Sturmgeschütz III, better known as the StuG. Technically, it wasn't a tank. It was a self-propelled assault gun. No rotating turret, and the main gun was fixed directly into the hull. Sounds like a drawback? In practice, it became a major advantage. Without a turret, the StuG had an extremely low profile, about 2 meters tall. On a battlefield filled with tall grass, rubble, and broken buildings, it could be very hard to spot until it opened fire. And when it did, it hit hard. At first, the StuG was built to support infantry, taking out machine gun positions and fortifications. But once the Eastern Front filled up with Soviet T-34s and KV-1s, German planners realized they needed a dedicated hunter. They mounted a long-barreled 75mm WW2 on the proven Panzer III chassis, and the StuG quickly became a serious threat to Allied armor. Why was it so effective? First, cost. One Tiger could cost roughly as much as 4 StuGs. Second, reliability. The Panzer III platform was well developed and easier to keep running than early, more temperamental Panthers. And the numbers matter. StuG III became Germany's most produced tracked fighting vehicle. More than 10,000 were built. Many historical estimates also suggest that by 1944, StuG crews had knocked out more enemy tanks than Tigers and Panthers combined. Even Michael Wittmann, before he became famous in a Tiger, scored some of his early successes in a StuG III. It fought everywhere, from North Africa to the snow and mud of the Eastern Front and into the Normandy bocage. The StuG didn't try to be a flashy Wunderwaffe. It simply did its job, efficiently, affordably, and with results. Panzer IV was the one German tank that was produced and fought from the first to the last day of World War II. From the invasion of Poland in 1939 to the final barricades in Berlin in 1945. While other designs came and went, became outdated, or grew too complex, the Panzer IV stayed in the fight. Why was it so important? One word: upgrades. At the start, the Panzer IV was designed as an infantry support tank with a short 75mm gun. It wasn't meant to duel other tanks. That job belonged to the Panzer III. But when German forces met the Soviet T-34 in 1941, everything changed. The Panzer III had basically reached its limit, while the IV still had room to grow. Its chassis was so well designed that it could take the long, powerful 75mm WW2. It turned what had once been an infantry support tank into one of the most dangerous tank hunters on the battlefield. Now compare it to its famous successors. The Panther was faster and the Tiger was tougher, but both could be a mechanic's nightmare. They broke down under their own weight and they were extremely expensive to build. The Panzer IV, on the other hand, was dependable like a well-worn tool. Crews knew that if they had to drive 100 kilometers, the IV was likely to make it, rather than end up on the roadside with a failed transmission. More than 8,500 Panzer IVs were built during the war, making it Germany's most produced tank. For American Sherman crews, running into late war Panzer, 4 variants like the Ausf H or J could be a serious test. Its gun could punch through American armor at ranges where a Sherman might still be struggling to get an effective shot. Sure, it didn't have sloped armor like the T-34, and with its vertical steel plates, it looked a bit old school, but it was well balanced. It was a professional's tool, no flashy hype, just reliable results. If the Panzer IV was an evolution, then the next vehicle was a real revolution, the Panzer V Panther. Many historians and armor experts call it the best tank of World War II. But the road to that reputation was paved with major mistakes, rushed decisions, and a lot of engineering ambition. It began with the shock of 1941. When German tank crews first ran into the Soviet T-34, they realized their old approach, flat, vertical armor, was falling behind. Hitler demanded something better, and the answer became the Panther. Look at its shape. This was the first German tank to fully embrace sloped armor. That meant an 80mm front plate could offer protection closer to a much thicker slab without making the vehicle absurdly heavy. But the Panther's real star was its gun, the 75mm KWK-42 with a very long barrel, L/70. Many people assume the Tiger's 88mm was the most powerful German tank gun, but that's an oversimplification. Thanks to its high muzzle velocity, the Panther's gun could deliver excellent penetration at longer ranges. In the right conditions, it could defeat Allied armor before the enemy could even get a clean shot. Still, the Panther had a dark side. It was also a victim of being pushed too hard, too fast. Its battlefield debut in 1943 at Kursk was rough. Many Panthers broke down due to engine fires and transmission failures, often before they even met the enemy. German designers rushed production, and a tank intended to be around 35 tons grew closer to 45. The suspension and gearbox struggled under the extra weight. For American crews in Normandy, the Panther could feel more dangerous than the Tiger. Why? Because Tigers were rare, but Panthers were everywhere. In a head-on fight, U.S. forces often had to risk multiple Shermans to outmaneuver one, trying to get around its strong front armor and hit the weaker sides. Transitioning from classic turreted tanks to specialized tank destroyers, it is impossible to overlook the vehicle that many historians and engineers consider the best in its class of the entire Second World War. Meet the Jagdpanther. When German engineers decided to combine the Panther tank chassis with the incredible firepower of the 88mm gun from the King Tiger, they created a true technical masterpiece. By discarding the traditional turret, the designers housed the gun in a massive armored casement. Its 80mm frontal armor was positioned at a very sharp sloped angle. This made the vehicle extremely resilient to frontal hits. Enemy projectiles often simply ricocheted away. Moreover, the absence of a turret helped maintain a relatively low silhouette, which was perfect for camouflage. The main advantage of the Jagdpanther was its Pak-43 gun. It easily penetrated the armor of any Allied tank at vast distances. In July 1944, during the battles in Normandy, the 654th Heavy Anti-Tank Battalion, equipped with these machines, demonstrated their phenomenal effectiveness in defense. Thanks to the high professionalism of the crews, these vehicles could halt entire columns of armor, destroying enemy tanks from well-prepared ambushes. They continued to do their job until the very end of the war, turning into impregnable mobile bunkers on the long avenues of the capital during the defense of Berlin in 1945. However, this perfect concept had one significant flaw: time. Production only began in January 1944, and German industry managed to produce only about 415 units. It was a superb combat vehicle with a perfect balance of mobility, protection, and firepower. But there were simply too few of them to change the overall situation on the front lines. If you think size is everything on the battlefield, here's a vehicle that proved the opposite: the Jagdpanzer XXXVIII, better known by its nickname, the Hetzer, often translated as hunter or instigator. This wasn't a tank in the usual sense. It was an answer to a desperate wartime problem. How do you give infantry a hard-hitting anti-tank gun when your factories are getting hammered by Allied bombing? Germany used the chassis of the older Czech Panzer XXXVIII, a dependable platform, but one that was completely outclassed in a direct tank fight by the later years of the war. They removed the turret and covered the hull with a sharply angled armored box. The result looked like a steel wedge, but it became something Allied tank crews learned to hate. Why was the Hetzer so effective? First, its profile. It was extremely low, under 2 meters tall, so it could hide behind a small embankment or in thick brush. On the Western Front, in tight German city streets or the Normandy bocage, The Hetzer became an ambush specialist. Sherman crews often didn't even know where the shot came from. Second, its armor. Thanks to the aggressive slope of its front plate, its 60mm frontal armor could behave like something much thicker in real combat conditions. Allied rounds could glance off that sharp nose instead of biting in. But there was a price. If the Hetzer looked clever from the outside, the inside was brutal for the crew. 4 men were crammed into a space that barely felt big enough for one. The gun was also offset to the right, which made aiming and working inside the fighting compartment awkward. The loader had to operate from an unnatural position, which could slow the rate of fire. Even so, more than 2,800 were built between 1944 and 1945. They were relatively cheap, easy to conceal, and carried a strong 75mm gun capable of knocking out a T-34 or a Sherman at around a kilometer under the right conditions. For American intelligence, the Hetzer was an unpleasant surprise. Its arrival forced Allied units to rethink their approach, because this small, well-hidden wedge could stop an entire armored column simply by being in the right place at the right time. Previous armored vehicles on our list were highly effective tools of war, but the Tiger I became its true legend even before it rolled off the assembly line. In 1942, the appearance of this heavyweight on the battlefield caused a real shock. The Allies simply had nothing that could stop 56 tons of German steel. This specific tank is the reason the term Tiger phobia appeared in British and American intelligence reports. Every Allied crew seeing any German tank in the distance would report, "It's a Tiger I," even if it was just a standard Panzer IV with side skirts. Why was it so effective in combat? 2 reasons: the gun and the armor. The legendary 88mm gun, adapted from an anti-aircraft flak, could penetrate any Allied tank from over 2 kilometers away, long before the enemy could even get close enough to return fire. And the 100mm frontal armor made it practically invulnerable to standard anti-tank weapons of the time. The vehicle's true combat potential was fully unlocked when the best German tank aces transferred to the Tiger I, making it even more effective. Genuine professionals like Michael Wittmann and Otto Carius achieved their most remarkable results specifically in this machine. In the hands of an experienced crew, one such tank turned into a mobile fortress, capable of halting the advance of entire armored regiments for hours. But was the Tiger I perfect in the grand scale of the war? The answer is more complex. It proved incredibly expensive and difficult to produce. While Germany built only about 1,350 units of the Tiger I, the US produced nearly 50,000 Shermans. It was a battle between individual quality and mass quantity. Look at its suspension, the famous overlapping road wheels. They provided surprisingly smooth driving for such a massive vehicle, but they were a technical nightmare for the crew. If an inner wheel broke down or mud froze between them, the tank became immobilized. The Tiger I required not just mechanics, but true artisans on the battlefield. But no one doubts that the Tiger I was the king of the World War II battlefields. It is a true legend and a genius of German engineering. If you take the reliable Panzer IV chassis, remove the turret, and try to make the vehicle as hard to spot as possible, you get this, the Jagdpanzer IV. This was a vehicle designed not to be seen. While the Tiger tried to intimidate the enemy with sheer presence, the Jagdpanzer IV operated more like a camouflage sniper. It stood only about 1.85 meters tall, meaning this tank destroyer was shorter than an average American basketball player. On paper, it looked like the perfect defensive weapon. In later variants, the Germans mounted a long 75mm gun, similar to the Panthers, and paired it with well-sloped armor built into the hull. The concept impressed even Heinz Guderian, the key figure behind Germany's armored doctrine, who pushed to reduce regular Panzer IV production in favor of this vehicle. Because of its flat nose and long barrel, soldiers gave it a nickname, the Guderian Duck, Guderian Ente. But how good was it in real combat? In many situations, very good. On the Western Front, where US forces often had to advance through thick forests and narrow roads, the Jagdpanzer IV could be a real nightmare. You didn't see it until it fired. And when it did, its L-70 gun could punch through a Sherman with ease at typical combat ranges. Still, there was one issue engineers couldn't fully solve: weight balance. With the heavy gun and thick frontal armor, the center of gravity shifted far forward. That put extreme stress on the front road wheels. In mud or soft ground, the duck could dig its nose in and lose mobility. Crew comfort was another problem. If the StuG was cramped, the Jagdpanzer IV was even tighter. Every movement for the loader became a kind of awkward physical choreography, especially under pressure. If the Tiger I was a legend, then the Tiger II, often called the King Tiger, was meant to be a god of war. It was the heaviest, most powerful, and most expensive mass-produced tank of World War II. 70 tons of steel, nearly 8 inches of frontal armor, angled like the Panthers. At the time, no Allied gun could reliably penetrate it from the front at realistic combat ranges, and its own 88mm KWK-43 was so powerful it could destroy virtually any Allied tank at distances out to 3 kilometers under the right conditions. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the appearance of King Tigers caused real panic among American units. When one of these monsters rolled onto a road, stopping it often required air attack or heavy artillery. But was it truly effective? This is where the harsh reality of German logistics shows up. The King Tiger was simply too heavy for many European bridges. Its engine, the same 700 horsepower Maybach used in the Panther, was pushed beyond its limits. It also drank fuel at an extreme rate, roughly 800 liters per 100 kilometers off-road, at a time when fuel was desperately scarce. Most King Tigers weren't lost in direct combat. Crews often had to destroy their own tanks because they ran out of fuel, got stuck in mud or broke down, and there simply weren't recovery vehicles capable of towing a 70-ton machine out of trouble. Germany built only 489 Tiger IIs. For comparison, the Soviet Union produced thousands of IS-2 heavy tanks in the same period. The Tiger II stands as a monument to engineering excellence that lost touch with battlefield reality. It was an attempt to build a perfect weapon at a time when Germany needed equipment that was reliable, repairable, and available in large numbers. The King Tiger was a predator without a future, magnificent but doomed. If the Jagdpanther was an example of perfect balance, the next vehicle on our list became the embodiment of engineering maximalism. Meet the Jagdtiger, the heaviest mass-produced armored vehicle of World War II. Built on the lengthened chassis of the King Tiger, the Jagdtiger weighed approximately 71 tons. Its frontal armor reached 250 millimeters, providing an unprecedented level of protection against most anti-tank weapons of that time. The frontal section of this casemate was practically unreachable for standard enemy projectiles. The main feature of the vehicle was its high-powered gun, the 128mm PaK-44. It allowed for effective engagement of armored vehicles at distances of over 3 kilometers. The projectiles from this gun carried enormous kinetic energy, making the Jagdtiger one of the most powerful tank destroyers in history. The famous tank ace, Otto Carius, whom we mentioned earlier, commanded a unit of these very machines in the spring of 1945. In the hands of trained crews, the Jagdtiger became a serious obstacle to any enemy advance. However, the grand scale brought technical challenges as well. Due to its massive weight, the vehicle had limited mobility. It used the same engine as the much lighter Panther, so the transmission and suspension operated at the absolute limit of their capabilities. Additionally, the Jagdtiger required vast amounts of fuel, which became a critical issue at the end of the war. Produced in a quantity of only about 80 units, the Jagdtiger became a symbol of the pursuit of super heavy weaponry. Many of these vehicles were not lost in combat. Crews often had to abandon their equipment due to mechanical failures or lack of fuel. It was a mobile bunker that demonstrated impressive technical power, but proved too complex for the conditions of the front line at that time. Continuing our discussion on the most effective German armored vehicles, we must examine an entire family of machines that perfectly embodied the glass cannon concept. This is the Marder series of tank destroyers. By 1942, the German command faced a critical problem. New Soviet tanks neutralized the effectiveness of most light Wehrmacht artillery. Since developing new heavy vehicles required time, engineers found a quick and pragmatic solution. They decided to combine a powerful anti-tank gun with existing but already obsolete tank chassis. This approach spawned three main branches. The Marder I was primarily based on captured French equipment, such as the Lorraine tractors. The Marder II was created on the chassis of the German Panzer II light tank, while the most mass-produced Marder III received the reliable chassis of the Czech Panzer 38T. From an engineering standpoint, this was a complete compromise. Early models had a high silhouette, and the crew was protected only by thin armor plates from the front and flanks. The open-top fighting compartment made them vulnerable to artillery shrapnel. However, the main advantage of these machines lay not in their armor, but in their phenomenal firepower. The main argument of the Marders became the modernized, captured Soviet 76mm guns and the powerful domestic 7.5cm PaK 40. At distances over a kilometer, these guns confidently penetrated the armor of Soviet T-34 tanks on the Eastern Front, and later, most of the Allied tanks these machines encountered in Normandy and Italy. Operating exclusively from ambushes and rapidly changing positions after a few shots, Marder crews demonstrated high results. They were true professionals in their field, who masterfully used the terrain and halted massive enemy armored offensives. The open-top compartment and thin armor required flawless tactics, as direct engagement was extremely dangerous, but the incredible lethality of the gun completely compensated for this drawback. Produced in a total run of nearly 3,000 units across various modifications, these machines became the backbone of the Wehrmacht's mobile anti-tank defense in the middle of the war. The Marder series proved that proper engineering improvisation could turn an obsolete chassis into one of the most effective tank destroyers of World War II. And now let's move on to the next machine on our list. If you look at the Panzer III on paper, thin armor and a modest 37mm gun, later upgraded to a 50mm, you might wonder, how was this ever effective? But the Panzer III proved a key point. A tank isn't just a gun, it's a system. The real secret was inside the turret. The Panzer III was one of the first tanks to use a true three-man turret. The commander didn't have to load the gun or fire it himself. That meant he could focus on what mattered most, seeing the battlefield and directing the fight. In 1941, many Soviet and French tank commanders were effectively blind, forced to juggle aiming, firing, and command at the same time. A Panzer III commander, by contrast, had better all-around visibility through the commander's cupola. And with a radio in every tank, something many other armies treated as a luxury, Panzer III units could coordinate like a single, organized team. That was the core of Blitzkrieg. The Panzer III wasn't built to soak up direct hits. It was built to strike first, maneuver to the flank, and reposition fast. In the sands of North Africa, the III became a favorite of Erwin Rommel's forces because it was fast and generally reliable. Even after more powerful tanks appeared, the Panzer III chassis lived on, most famously as the foundation for the StuG III discussed earlier. But the Panzer III had a hard limit. Its turret ring was too small to mount a high-powered 75mm gun capable of fighting newer Allied tanks. By 1943, its time as Germany's main battle tank had passed. Continuing the topic of super heavy vehicles, it is worth mentioning another unique project that had two names in its history, the Ferdinand and its later modification, the Elefant. This vehicle was born out of engineering ambition. When the famous designer Ferdinand Porsche was competing for the contract to build the Tiger I tank, he was so confident in his victory that he pre-built 90 chassis of his own design. However, another company won the contract. To avoid wasting the already completed platforms, High Command decided to convert them into heavy tank destroyers. The Ferdinand received a very innovative but highly complex gasoline-electric transmission, a massive casemate with 200mm frontal armor, and the excellent 88mm PaK 43 gun were mounted on the chassis. The Ferdinand saw its first major action during the massive Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943. In open spaces, these vehicles showed phenomenal effectiveness. They could destroy Soviet armor from distances of several kilometers while remaining completely unreachable to return fire. However, real combat revealed a serious design flaw. The early versions of the Ferdinand had no machine gun for defense against infantry. Combined with low mobility and frequent breakdowns of the complex transmission, this created major problems. If the vehicle hit a mine or broke down, the crew often had to destroy their own equipment and retreat. Learning from this experience, engineers recalled the surviving vehicles to the factory for upgrades. They added a hull machine gun in the frontal armor, installed a commander's cupola for better visibility, and renamed the vehicle the Elefant. The upgraded machines actively participated in heavy defensive battles in Italy and on the Eastern Front. Despite their complex development history and technical difficulties, the Ferdinand and Elefant went down in history as some of the longest range and most heavily protected armored snipers of World War II, whose accuracy commanded great respect. Continuing our story about the most effective armor of the Third Reich, we must mention a vehicle that became one of the main surprises of the early war. The most interesting fact is that one of the best German light tanks was not actually German at all. This is the Panzer III. The letter T in the designation stands for Czechish, Czech. The history of this machine began before the outbreak of the global conflict of World War II. When Germany annexed Czechoslovakia, it acquired the massive factories of the CKD company and their newest development, the LTVWAS 38 light tank. German engineers and military officials quickly realized that they had a true technical diamond in front of them and immediately adopted it into their army under a new name. Why was this captured prize so important? In 1939 and 1940, the core of the German panzer divisions consisted of light Panzer I and Panzer II tanks, which frankly lacked the firepower to combat enemy armor. Against their background, the Panzer III looked like a true leader. It was armed with an excellent 37mm Skoda gun, which confidently penetrated the armor of most European tanks of that era. But its main advantage was not the gun, but its phenomenal reliability. The design of the suspension and engine was so successful that the tank could make forced marches of hundreds of kilometers without any major technical breakdowns. This was a perfect fit for the Blitzkrieg strategy. It was the Panzer III that became the striking force during the lightning campaigns in Poland, France, and the initial stage of Operation Barbarossa on the Eastern Front. Crews adored these vehicles for their predictability and extreme ease of operation. Of course, the machine had its drawbacks. Its armor was assembled using rivets, which was a classic solution of the 1930s. But upon a direct hit from an enemy projectile, the rivets could snap off and pose a danger to the crew inside. By 1942, when medium and heavy tanks with thick armor began to dominate the battlefield, the base model of this tank became obsolete. However, the story of this brilliant Czech design did not end there. The Panzer III chassis proved to be so robust and reliable that German industry continued to produce it until the very end of World War II. As we mentioned earlier, this very platform became the perfect foundation for the successful Marder series of tank destroyers and later for the famous Hetzer. This machine proved that supreme reliability and a solid engineering base are often more important than the thickness of frontal armor. We couldn't end this list without mentioning it. The machine that makes even the King Tiger look small, the Panzer VIII Maus. This wasn't just a tank. It was Ferdinand Porsche's attempt to build a true land battleship, 188 tons of steel. To put that in perspective, this single vehicle weighed about as much as 10 Panzer IIIs combined. Its frontal armor reached around 240 millimeters, and its main 128mm gun was powerful enough to destroy almost any target it could see. But was it effective? The short answer is no. It was a disaster. The Maus was so heavy it could damage paved roads. No normal bridge in Europe could support its weight. To cross rivers, engineers even explored a system where one Maus would drive underwater while receiving electricity by cable from another Maus on the bank. Its engine consumed fuel at an extreme rate, and its top speed was only about 13 kilometers per hour, making it an easy target for Allied air attack, like the American P-47 Thunderbolt, or for Soviet artillery. Germany completed only 2 prototypes, and neither ever fought in real combat. When Soviet forces approached the Kummersdorf test area, German troops destroyed the vehicles so they wouldn't be captured. Later, Soviet engineers combined parts from the two prototypes into a single vehicle, which was eventually displayed in a tank museum. German tanks were arguably the most advanced of their time. German engineers introduced the standard for excellent radio communication, effective and powerful guns, and incredible optics. But these tanks lost. They lost not because they performed poorly in combat, but because war isn't just a duel between tanks. It is a war of logistics, mass production, and the time it takes to sustain it all. Effectiveness isn't just about armor penetration. It's the ability to reach the front line without getting bogged down in hours of field repairs. It's the ability to be repaired quickly, without specialized equipment by the crew itself. And it is the ability to be produced in high enough numbers to hold a front line thousands of kilometers long. Which of these tanks do you consider the best and most effective? Or maybe there is another tank I forgot that should be added to this list. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.